Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into the heart of what makes us tick. We're talking about early experiences, those very first relationships we have, how they shape who we become, and, get this, how they actually sculpt our brains.
Really profound stuff.
Absolutely. And we're zeroing in on one super important area of the brain, the orbitofrontal cortex.
Most people just call it the OFC. Makes it easier.
Yeah, the OFC. And our sources today, wow, they really get into how those first connections, especially with our caregivers, actually wire us up.
It's like laying down the tracks for how we'll handle our emotions, how we pay attention, even how we control our impulses as we grow up.
Yeah, that's what we're going to unpack, how those early interactions create these lasting footprints. And hopefully along the way, we'll all have some of those aha moments where we're like, oh, so that's why I do that. Ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right, let's map this territory out. First things first, the OFC. Where is this brain region, and what does it actually do?
Okay, so picture this. It's right behind your forehead, kind of near your right eye. And it's like a command center. It's part of the prefrontal cortex that's, the part of our brain that evolved a little later, like a little bit more recently. And it's really involved in all those things that make us human, like understanding social cues, like figuring out what's going on in those complex human interactions, and then, of course, controlling those impulses and paying attention, all that good stuff.
So the OFC, it's like the brain's social and emotional manager.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it.
And our source mentions something really interesting. It says the right OFC is like the more developed side, like it takes the lead.
That's right. It seems to mature a bit faster than the left side and ends up playing a more dominant role, like in most people.
Fascinating. And here's where things get really interesting, especially if we consider something like ADD.
Oh, yeah, that's a good example.
Because the research, it's showing some connections there. Like difficulties with the OFC could be linked to some of those core challenges you see in ADD, like impulse control and managing emotions.
Yeah, ADD involves a lot of different brain areas. It's really complex. But the research is pointing to the OFC as, potentially playing a big role in those specific issues, like difficulty inhibiting impulses and regulating emotions.
And the source mentions something called stressed attunement. They say this can have a real impact on the OFC, especially early on.
Yeah, that's a key concept. Basically, it's when a caregiver, like a parent, isn't consistently responding to a baby's needs in a way that's, in tune with what the baby's trying to communicate.
Ah, okay. So like if there are delays in responding, or maybe the caregiver's reactions are kind of all over the place.
Exactly. Or if their emotional state just doesn't match up with what the baby needs in that moment.
So like the baby's crying and the caregiver's, I don't know, distracted or stressed themselves.
Yeah, something like that.
Got it. Makes sense. Now, this whole idea of a natural agenda, that really caught my eye. What exactly does that mean?
It's this really insightful concept. You see, nature, it has this big plan, this goal, to create adults who are, self-motivated, self-regulated, people who can take care of themselves. But here's the thing, babies, they definitely aren't born that way.
Not even close.
No. They need us for pretty much everything.
Everything. Feeding, comfort, soothing, like their whole world depends on us.
Exactly. So this natural agenda, it's like this incredible journey. It's a transformation from that complete dependence to independence, from being regulated by someone else to being able to regulate ourselves.
So we go from being totally reliant on others to handling things on our own.
Yeah. And the source really emphasizes that the development of the prefrontal cortex, especially the OFC, is driving this whole process. Like it's the engine of that change.
Makes sense. Now, the source mentions that the OFC has connections to, well, pretty much every other part of the brain. That's got to be significant, right?
Oh, it's huge. Like the OFC, it's a real hub. It's connected to, well, almost every other part of the cortex.
Which is the kind of the thinking part of our brain, right?
Exactly. And it's also connected to those deeper, more primitive brain structures, the ones that control our basic bodily functions and like those powerful primal emotions,
Yeah.
Fear, anger, all that.
Right. Like our fight or flight response.
Exactly. So the OFC, because it's got all these connections, it can really influence and be influenced by like so many different things going on in our bodies and minds.
It's like the ultimate integrator, bringing everything together. And it's also packed with those feel-good chemicals.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, that's another really important piece. The OFC, it's at the center of the brain's reward system. Like it's full of dopamine and endorphins.
And those are the chemicals that give us that sense of pleasure, right? Like that feeling of reward.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling good. They actually, like, help strengthen those connections between brain cells.
Oh, wow. So positive experiences actually help wire the brain for more positive experiences.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, this next part, I found this really fascinating. The OFC, it's also involved in visual spatial orientation.
Yeah, that might seem surprising at first, but
Because when you think about it, that's about our ability to like see and understand where we are in space.
right.
Mm.
And the source, it connects this to, like, bumping into things or having trouble with directions.
Exactly. And those are things that we sometimes see in people with ADD.
Right, right.
So it's really interesting. The OFC, it's connected to those parts of the brain that help us process visual information, understand where things are in the world around us.
So if those functions aren't working quite right, it can show up as those kinds of, I don't know, clumsiness or difficulties.
Exactly. And it
Mhm.
really highlights, just how widely the OFC influences how we function, like how we move through the world, literally.
So we've got navigating our emotions, navigating the physical world. We've got the reward system. What about attention? That's another big one.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. The OFC, it's a key player in attention control. Think about how much information we're constantly bombarded with, like everything going on around us, plus all those thoughts and feelings inside of
Right.
it.
It's like information overload all the time.
And the OFC, it's like a filter
Yeah.
or a spotlight.
Hmm.
It helps us choose what to focus on, like what's important in that moment, so we can tune out the distractions and, concentrate.
So it's helping us stay on task, basically.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about emotional communication. This is where the right OFC really steps up, right? Like it becomes an emotional decoder.
That's a great way to put it. While the left side of the brain is more focused on, the literal meanings of words, like
Yeah.
what are you actually saying?
Hmm.
The right OFC, it's all about those subtle emotional cues.
So like body language, facial expressions.
Yeah, all of that. And
Mm.
tone of voice. It's constantly processing those nonverbal signals to figure out, like, the real emotional meaning behind what someone is saying.
Oh, that's so interesting because sometimes what someone says and how they say it are two totally different things.
Exactly. And the OFC is picking up on that mismatch. Or, maybe confirming that everything's aligned.
Right, right. And the source really emphasizes that the OFC isn't just about understanding other people's emotions. It's also about like evaluating the emotional significance of situations and even the nature of our relationships with others.
That's right. Like,
Yeah.
is this person a threat? Are they safe? Are they someone I can trust? The OFC is weighing in on all of that.
Wow. It's like our emotional guidance system.
In a way, yeah. And the source considers it to be the dominant brain area for processing, expressing, and regulating emotions. Like, it's really involved in the whole emotional package.
Okay, so feeling emotions, understanding them in others, managing them, and that brings us to impulse control.
Yeah.
How does the OFC help us not just react immediately to everything we feel?
Well, think of it like this. Those deeper brain areas, the ones that generate those, those really intense, immediate emotional impulses, the OFC is like a brake on those systems.
Ah, okay.
So when the OFC is working well, it can create a pause, like a space, between feeling an emotion and actually acting on it.
Oh, that's so important. So we have time to think before we just react.
Exactly. It allows us to have those more thoughtful, mature responses.
Mhm.
But if those OFC connections are disrupted, or if it's not functioning optimally, that braking system weakens.
And then we're more likely to just like blurt things out or act impulsively.
Yeah, those raw emotions, they kind of flood our awareness and can overwhelm our rational thinking.
Oh, that makes sense. And then there's emotional memory. Like the OFC is a recorder of our early emotional experiences. Is that right?
You got it. It plays a really crucial role in storing the emotional impact of our experiences, especially, those very early interactions with our caregivers, like during infancy and those first few years of life.
Those really formative years.
Exactly. The source actually calls those interactions the foundation, like the blueprint for how a lot of our later emotional reactions and relationship patterns will play out.
Wow, so our early experiences are like setting the stage for how we'll relate to people and respond to things emotionally throughout our lives.
That's right. And the way it works is like these groups of neurons in the OFC, they kind of encode these emotional footprints of those early experiences. And those footprints, well, they become patterns we tend to follow, often without even realizing it.
This idea of emotional footprints, that's really powerful, and it connects directly to this principle. Neurons that fire together wire together. Can you break that down for us?
Okay, so this comes from Donald Hebb, a really important neuroscientist. And basically what it means is that when brain cells, when neurons are active at the same time, repeatedly, the connections between them get stronger. like more efficient.
So the more you use a pathway, the stronger it gets.
Yeah, kinda.
Mhm.
And they become more likely to activate together in the future.
Ah, okay. So with those early emotional imprints in the OFC, those pathways get really well worn.
Exactly. Because those experiences with caregivers are happening over and over again. So you end up with these groups of brain cells that are primed to fire together, like it's a familiar pattern.
And that helps explain why sometimes a seemingly small thing can trigger such a huge reaction, right?
Exactly. It's like, that example in the source, road rage.
Right, right.
You get cut off in traffic, which on the surface might seem like a minor thing, but it can unleash this really intense anger.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, whoa, where'd that come from?
And the source suggests that what's happening is, it's like a replay, an echo of those early experiences, like maybe those really intense feelings of frustration or rage that we had as babies or toddlers,
Oh, wow.
which were, really powerfully imprinted in the OFC. And then because of that neurons that fire together, wire together thing,
Yeah.
those pathways are still there, ready to be activated.
So that outburst in traffic might actually be connected to something that happened, years and years ago.
It's possible, yeah.
Now, the source also talks about evidence from brain injuries. What can we learn about the OFC from people who've had damage to the prefrontal cortex?
Well, the research on brain injuries, it really gives us a lot of insight into how important the prefrontal cortex is, including the OFC. Because what they found is that people who've had damage to this area, they often show behaviors and emotional patterns that are very similar to some of the challenges you see in ADD.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Like they might have trouble focusing on tasks, get distracted easily, they might have trouble remembering instructions, or they might have emotional outbursts.
They're more impulsive.
Exactly. And they might have a hard time learning from their mistakes.
So it's like the damage kind of creates these difficulties that look a lot like ADD.
Yeah, it really suggests that the prefrontal cortex plays a vital role in all of those abilities.
But the source is careful to point out that with ADD, it's not that there's damage, it's that the brain circuits develop differently. Can you explain that distinction a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So in ADD, there's not like a specific injury to the brain. It's
Yeah.
more that certain brain circuits, particularly those in the prefrontal cortex, they just don't develop in the typical way.
Okay, so it's not that something happened to the brain, it's that it's developing along a different path.
Right, it's not like a sudden thing. It's that certain brain connections, they don't fully mature.
Mhm.
And the author, they suggest that this disruption in the development of the prefrontal cortex, it's a big factor in a lot of cases of ADD.
And what causes those disruptions?
Well, that's a complex question.
Hmm.
But the source really highlights the role of emotional interactions and brain chemistry, like they're key.
Okay, so how do those things influence brain development?
So basically, emotional interactions, they have this huge impact on whether nerve cells grow and connect in healthy ways. And this happens through, all sorts of complex chemical processes. Like, for example, when a baby experiences those really joyful moments, their brain releases endorphins, those natural feel-good chemicals.
Oh, okay. So good experiences, good chemicals.
And those endorphins, they actually encourage the growth of nerve cells.
Mhm.
And they strengthen the connections between those cells.
So like positive interactions are actually building the brain?
Yeah, in a very real way.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, there have been studies, mostly with animals, that show that when there's prolonged exposure to stress hormones, like cortisol, it can actually cause certain brain areas to shrink.
Wow. So chronic stress can actually damage the brain.
It can have a really negative impact. Yeah.
So we need those positive, nurturing experiences to help the brain grow and develop in a healthy way.
Exactly. And it's not just about those immediate chemical releases. Early experiences also shape the long-term balance of neurotransmitters in the brain.
And neurotransmitters, those are the chemical messengers, right? The ones that carry signals between brain cells.
That's right. And so, just like nurturing care helps build the physical structure of the brain, it also helps to establish, the brain's chemical landscape.
Yeah.
And the source points out that there's this constant interplay between our psychological states and the neurochemistry of our frontal lobes. Like it's a two-way street.
So our experiences influence our brain chemistry, and our brain chemistry influences our experiences.
Exactly. And the source feels like this connection, it's often underestimated in modern medicine,
Oh, interesting.
and it can lead to, maybe too much reliance on medication alone.
Right, like trying to fix everything with a pill.
Yeah. And the source even quotes Daniel Siegel,
Oh, yeah, he's a well-known psychiatrist and author.
and he cautions against reducing our experiences down to just brain chemicals. Like, it's so much more complex than that.
So it's not just about finding the right chemical balance.
Right. The source really advocates for looking at the whole person, their life story, their relationships, not just their neurochemistry in isolation. And they make this really important point about how there's this tendency to attribute, complex mental health conditions solely to imbalances in neurotransmitters.
So like saying, oh, depression is just caused by low serotonin, or ADD is just caused by low dopamine.
Yeah, and while those chemicals are definitely involved, it's not that simple.
Right, right. It's not just a one-to-one relationship.
Exactly. Those chemicals, they operate within these incredibly complex systems involving, tons of molecules, synapses, brain circuits, and they're also influenced by our social environment, our culture, our past experiences, our current
So
experiences.
it's like this whole web of factors.
Right. In this source, they bring up this really interesting quote from Antonio Damasio,
Yeah.
and he basically says that it's not just the absence or low amount of a specific neurotransmitter that directly causes certain behaviors.
It's not that straightforward.
No, it's way more nuanced than that, like context matters.
Right, right. It's about the whole picture.
Yeah. And the source gives this really interesting example.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
They talk about these studies with monkeys, and they found that dominant monkeys actually have lower serotonin levels.
Mm.
But here's the thing, the decrease in serotonin, it happens after they become dominant. So it's not that the low serotonin caused them to become dominant, it's that the experience of being dominant actually changed their brain chemistry.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It's like the social experience itself is shaping the brain.
Wow. So the brain is constantly adapting to our experiences.
Exactly. And the source gives another example with serotonin and stress. Like, experiencing a lot of stress can impact serotonin levels, which can then contribute to depressive symptoms. So it's not just that low serotonin causes depression, it's that stressful experiences can lower serotonin, which then makes you more vulnerable to depression.
Right, right. So those chemical imbalances, they might be a consequence of our experiences as much as a cause.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that when we use medications to alter neurotransmitter levels, what we're really doing is addressing the biological impact of our experiences, not just an inherited biological predisposition.
It's like we're not just treating a chemical imbalance, we're treating the effects of our life experiences.
That's right.
That's a really different way to think about it. And this whole discussion about the role of environment, especially social interaction, it's really highlighting how important those early relationships are, especially when it comes to dopamine, right?
Absolutely. The source really dives into this. They talk about all these animal studies that have shown that social stimulation, it's essential for the healthy growth of those dopamine-releasing nerve endings.
So like positive social interactions actually help build those dopamine pathways in the brain.
Yeah. And it's also essential for the development of the receptors that dopamine needs to bind to in order to work properly. Like, you need both.
So without those interactions, those dopamine systems don't develop as well.
Right. And there's even this one study mentioned about these young monkeys who were separated from their mothers for just 6 days. And after that short separation, they already had these significant alterations in their dopamine and other neurotransmitter systems.
Wow, just 6 days.
Yeah, it really shows how sensitive these systems are. And one researcher, Stephen Dubofsky, he suggested that losing an important attachment figure can actually lead to this reduction in those key brain chemicals.
So like the loss of that relationship is literally changing the brain
Yeah,
and making it harder for the brain to function optimally.
exactly.
That's really powerful. And the source goes on to discuss the importance of early touch and attunement.
Right, right. Those early interactions, especially with mothers, they're so important. And there's this really interesting study that they highlight about rats.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that one.
So they found that the rat pups that received more licking and grooming from their mothers, they actually developed more efficient brain circuitry for managing anxiety as adults.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And they also had more receptors for those brain chemicals that help us feel calm and relaxed. So those early interactions, they literally shaped their ability to handle stress later in life.
That's incredible. So loving touch, it's not just about feeling good in the moment, it's actually building the brain's capacity for resilience.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, they looked at newborn animals that were raised in isolation, and what they found was that they had reduced dopamine activity in their prefrontal cortex.
Ah, that key area for attention, motivation, self-regulation.
Exactly. So again, it highlights how sensitive the prefrontal cortex is to those early experiences.
And how much those early relationships matter.
Absolutely.
And the source really emphasizes how this translates to human infant development, especially the importance of that attuned gaze between mother and child.
That's right. Like that moment when a mother and baby are just, locked in on each other, and they're both like completely present, and there's this sense of joy and connection.
Those moments are so beautiful.
They are. And it's believed that those kinds of interactions actually stimulate the growth of dopamine-rich nerve terminals in the baby's brain,
Wow.
and also the development of those dopamine receptors.
So those moments of connection, they're literally wiring the baby's brain for more dopamine.
Yeah, and it's thought that it's the release of chemicals in the brain during those experiences of joy that actually drives that growth.
Fascinating.
And, those happy interactions, they release both endorphins, which create that feeling of joy and excitement, and dopamine, which, fuels motivation and arousal. And both of those are thought to help build new connections in the right prefrontal cortex, and also, promote the growth of blood vessels in that area and the development of those dopamine receptors, which the source suggests might be, kind of scarce in people with ADD.
So those seemingly simple but really beautiful moments of connection in infancy, they're laying down these incredibly crucial neurological foundations.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
And then the source ends with this really thought-provoking idea. They suggest that maybe the acronym ADD could also stand for attunement deficit disorder.
Yeah, that's a powerful reframe.
It is.
It really highlights how important those attuned relationships are for developing those capacities that are often challenged in people with ADD, like attention, self-regulation, emotional well-being.
Right. And it makes you wonder, if we focus more on fostering those attuned relationships early on, would we see fewer challenges later?
That's a really good question.
So to bring it all back together, what's the core message here? What's the key takeaway from this deep dive into how our earliest experiences shape our brains?
I think the main message is that those early emotional experiences, especially the quality of our relationships with our caregivers and how attuned they are to us, they profoundly shape our developing brains, especially the orbitofrontal cortex, which plays such a central role in so many important functions.
And it's not just about shaping the brain, it's about shaping who we become, right?
Exactly. Those early interactions, they literally wire our brains for how we're going to handle our emotions, how we're going to pay attention, how we're going to interact with the world.
It's like laying down those emotional footprints that will follow throughout our lives.
That's a great way to put it.
And those footprints, they can be really positive and supportive, or they can create challenges that we'll have to work through.
Right.
And hopefully this deeper understanding, it gives you, our listener, some insight into your own experiences. Maybe it sheds some light on your own emotional reactions, your patterns, how you relate to others.
And maybe it gives you a new way to look at the people in your life.
Exactly. And it really makes you think about the importance of creating those nurturing, attuned environments for infants and children. Because those early experiences, they really do have such a profound impact.
They do. And it makes you wonder, what can we do as a society to support parents and caregivers in creating those positive environments?
Yeah, what can we do to help lay those strong foundations for healthy development?
It's a really important question, and one that deserves a lot more attention.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for having me. This was a great discussion.
It was. And to all of our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.